everyone, welcome back to Rachel's Studio. In today's video, we're going to look at a whole new paper that most watercolorists don't know you can paint watercolor on, but you can. I'm going to paint two whole paintings on this paper. And by the way, even if you don't paint on this paper that I talk about today, you can use pretty much the same exact wet and wet techniques to get very similar results on cold press paper. But I really loved, in particular, the very fluffy, soft edges that I got on this cat. Now, you might not be interested in painting cats, but think in terms of what can I do with this technique? Think fluffy clouds or really soft, out of focus backgrounds being really fun to paint with this paper. So it's not just for black fluffy cats. So I'm going to show you a few techniques, and there are a couple key things that you need to know to be successful with this paper, because my first attempt at this paper was actually months ago, and I'd forgotten about this paper. By the way, what are we talking about? It's pastelmat paper for pastel artists, but you can use a lot of different mediums on this. You can use pastel, acrylic, colored pencil, graphite, I think oil. So it will take a lot of different mediums and give really interesting results. In fact, a lot of pastel artists know you can paint watercolor on it because they use it very often for their underpainting, and then they put pastel on top of it. So you can find a lot of tutorials on YouTube about painting a watercolor underpainting and then using pastel on top of that on this paper. I'm going to share my experience with you testing out painting on Clairefontaine's pastelmat and some of the special things it does that would be hard to get on other papers. Not impossible, but it really makes blending and soft glowing edges really interesting. If you want to find a really easy way to change your style without trying too hard, just paint on a different paper, paint on a different surface. In fact, I've been painting on a few different surfaces. Yupo, I just did a study on Yupo for my Patreon students, which was really fun. But anyway, before we get too deep into this video about pastelmat and all the cool things you can do with it, my name is Rachel Parker Varner, for those of you who are new to my channel, and I would love it if you would subscribe so you can learn not just the how, but the why of watercolor, so you move along your art journey a lot faster. And I do like to talk a lot about design and things like that too, so even if you paint other mediums, you'll find a lot of good stuff on my channel. And so I would love it if you would like this video, if you really enjoy it, and leave me a comment below. Have you ever tried painting on pastelmat? Or do you know of other papers that maybe we haven't heard about? And in fact, that's the power of community, learning new things from each other. And I learned about this pastelmat as a substrate for painting watercolor on in my Facebook group, thanks to Roberta Dotti. Now, take a look at this awesome painting that she did of a dog. I love this painting. And so she inspired me to try this paper. This is a good point for me to invite you to join my free Facebook group, where you can learn from other artists and you can post your paintings and get advice or just show your paintings to each other. We really encourage each other and we really learn a lot from each other, including my discovery of pastelmat, thanks to one of my members, Roberta Dotti. So anyway, I'd love for you to join that Facebook group. So I made the mistake of trying it for a portrait of my son, Parker. Do you want to see the very ugly result? Should I show this or not? I don't know. Because there's a lot wrong with this. So that's my first painting. And it's really bad. And so I was like, that's bad. So I tried one more. This one's not as bad. And if you take a look at it, it does have really soft transitions between colors and values, and it's really easy to blend and get really soft, dreamy effects, which was exciting, but I was a little exhausted by this paper because you do have to kind of learn the tricks to make it work, and I didn't take the time to do that until now. I've done a lot of experiments on this paper. And one of the first paintings that I did was this painting, which came out well enough that it even sold. So this is a painting that I did of my cat Sadie. And what I love about this paper is how soft and dreamy you can get your edges. It also blends really beautifully. In fact, I was just playing around, not expecting to make anything happen when I painted. Well, first I painted this rainbow, which is really bright and kind of literal. And then I used a lot of push technique, which I use. I drip water into half dry paintings and get cauliflower effects. And it was interesting. But then I used the same brush that I had painted that rainbow, but it was a lot lighter. And then I put gray around it. And this rainbow, it just looked so alive. It looked like it was glowing from within. And I want to do more along this line of thinking with glowing effects on this paper, which I think there's a lot of potential here with this paper. And again, you could get very similar results on cold press paper or other watercolor papers, but this paper made it really easy to get these very soft, gradual gradations of color and value. So I want to play more with that. But then I was like, okay, so I see a lot of potential in this. I'm going to paint something else just for this free video that I'm doing for you guys. So I painted a Northern Lights painting. So I got some interesting effects on this paper. So there's a few things that you do need to know when you paint on this. In my experiments, I found out that if you wet the whole paper and paint wet and wet, and then you go back and paint on dry paper, which us watercolorists know, if you paint wet on dry, you're going to get a hard edge. Well, not with this paper. You won't get a hard edge if you have wet the paper, let it dry, and then you go back to paint another layer. You will not get hard edges. The way to get hard edges, this is the trick to this paper, like Sadie's ears are not furred out. They're very hard edged. In order to get hard edged ears like that, you have to paint on dry pastel mat that has never been wet. If you wet it, then let it dry, then try to paint hard edges, you won't get them. So I'll say that again, to get hard edges on this paper at all, you have to get them in that first go before you get the paper wet. So to paint her ears, for example, let's take a look. Actually, I'll just show you. Let's take a look at the clip of me painting her ears and how I did it. Okay, again, so the key element that you see at work here is that I am painting on virgin paper that has never been wet. So I only pre-wet inside the ear and inside the cat's face within the boundaries of the cat. And then I just use typical charging techniques that I use all the time on cold press. So these are the exact same techniques I use on cold press paper. I'm charging paint into my pre-wetted paper. And wherever there's water, the paint will flow. Wherever there is not water, the paint will not flow. Now, if I would have pre-wet this piece of pastel mat and tried this on dry paper after it had been wet and then allowed to dry, it would not stay within the boundaries. So that is a very unique characteristic of working on pastel mat that's different from cold press in that after you get the paper wet, let it dry, and then go back to paint wet on dry hard edges. They will not stay hard. They will get really nubbly, like what you saw in Roberta Dottie's painting. So that's just one key thing you need to know that makes this paper different to paint on than regular watercolor papers. All right, so that's how I did her ears. And then for the rest of her, I painted wet and wet. And then I had to do a lot of babysitting techniques because the fur would fluff out too far and I would have to do push technique to push it back, and I babysat it. It took 10 minutes to paint the cat, but then 20 minutes of babysitting as it dried. I had to really watch it to make sure that things didn't fur out and fluff out too much. So let's take a look at some of my babysitting techniques that I did with this painting. All right, now we're going to paint on dry paper, we're going to paint wet water all over this cat because I want soft, fluffy effects like you see in her tail. And right now I have all these hard edges because I painted on that virgin paper. So I got a lot of really beautiful wet on dry and dry brush effects, by the way, on this paper that I really did like a lot how they look. Very crisp and interesting edges I was able to get painting wet on dry and dry brush on the virgin pastel mat. But now it's been wet and now it's dried again and I re-wet it. And that's how I'm getting these soft, fluffy, furred out edges. That's the exact thing that I do on cold press paper or even hot press paper. I will pre-wet the paper and then paint wet and wet to get soft, fluffy looking fur. But here is the thing. I do what I call babysitting, and that's what you see me doing. I'm dropping clear water into the white paper next to the fur, next to the wet paint, so it will push into the fur and push that fur back because it was blobbing out too much and it needed to be pushed back. So what you can do, and this is on any watercolor paper, you can use the push technique. I do have a whole video about my push technique, but it's basically using the power of the cauliflower where you drop water. That's a good example right there. I dropped water onto the white paper next to the black fur, and that water will push into the paint and push it back so it doesn't blob out so much. And then I did a lot of blotting. So I would blot and then drop even more water in to push it back even more. So you can see very clearly how it's pushing the paint back. And so in a combination with blotting and dropping in clear water, you can get your blobs of paint that are blobbing out too much in control. But it took a lot of babysitting. All right, so if you want to watch that in real time from start to finish in real time and get the line drawing and the reference, you can join my Patreon. Let's look at a few clips of me working on this, and I'll share my highlights of what gave me success. I did some experiments with masking. I did some experiments with tape to see if this paper will take masking and tape. Let's see what happened. All right, the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to tape off the bottom of the lake here because I want a nice hard line for that. So I'm just using, this is Nito Holbein soft tape. It's a masking type tape. I get it off dickblick.com. I do have a whole supply list at rachelstudio.com/supply list, which has affiliate links. And I buy mine off dickblick.com. All right, so, but anyway, I have taped off this hard edge to make sure it stays hard and straight. Because this is the edge between the mountain or the hill and the water, and I want that really hard edged and really dark because the rest of this is going to be really light. So I'm just going to put very thick cream consistency paint on this hill, and I'm going to, in the reference, it's very almost flat and smooth, but that's not interesting. So I'm going to kind of jiggle my brush and make it look like there's some trees and some interest. That just adds interest. Okay, I think this is set up enough. Wow, I still got some bleeding underneath. Interesting. And I cannot fix that. So that is going to be what it's going to be. So that's good to know. I almost would have been better off not using tape. So there's that. Again, masking for my very beginners is just a liquid plastic that you paint on, or like we did, spatter on. You let it completely dry, and then it will save the white of your paper. The white of your paper, if you're doing watercolor the traditional, by the rules way, not that that always has to be that way. You can use other white paints and inks and pencils, but traditionally, with watercolor, you use the white of the paper for the freshest, most beautiful, crisp, sparkling whites, and they really are special looking. All right, so we're going to let that dry. All right, so what I've done here is I've gotten the whole thing wet again after I let it completely dry. So I got it, the whole sky and also the lake there wet. And for the most part, everything that had dried, the black paint set pretty well. And when I re-wet it, it stayed in place mostly. It did bleed a little bit where I had really thick paint, and that is the same thing that happens on cold press paper or hot press watercolor paper for that matter. So this is just classic wet and wet technique. I'm getting my sky painted with Holbein Opera. I have this sky color, the blue neon that's gorgeous, is a very rare pigment actually. It's by Rockwell out of Canada called Sky Blue with their PB17 pigment that is very hard to find in any other formulation. There's not many paint companies that use PB17, but this is the one place that I found it. I made a whole video about it. I'll link it here. But anyway, just using wet and wet techniques. And in a minute, you're going to see me also using some push technique here to get some really interesting effects. And I wish that I would have used dark enough paint in the colors of the Northern Lights, because later I had to go in again and re-wet it again to get my colors even deeper. And I got some beautiful blooms. Here you see me dropping in clean, clear water, and the cauliflower effects that it created were really pretty. And I want to paint another Aurora Borealis and be a little bit more bold with my first wash, so that when I do drop in the clean, clear water with the push technique, I can just let it bleed and not mess with it again. Because if you paint over them again after they've dried, then those really cool fingers of cauliflowers that look so perfect for an Aurora Borealis, you'll lose them, and I lost them. But you'll see as this matures, see those little fingers of white light blurring up into the black spots. I just love that, but unfortunately my pinks and my blues weren't deep enough, so I'm re-wetting the whole thing now, and that will make me lose those little fingers that were so pretty from the push technique. But I had to get my colors darker, so you can work in layers on this paper just like any other paper you use watercolor with. Most watercolorists do work in many layers between letting them dry. So you paint a layer, let it completely dry, paint another layer, let it completely dry to build up your colors, to build up your values. You can gray down color, and you can also make color richer and deeper and darker with successive layers. So that's just what I'm doing here. And you see how those little magical fingers kind of disappeared as I rework this paint. But good to know. And I may just paint another Northern Lights painting and try to leave those effects in by doing less layers. I'm going to let it dry completely now, I think, and then the fun part, we can take off the stars. All right, in conclusion, would I say you've got to go buy this? I would not. It is expensive, and only if you really just want to play around with a new paper, maybe discover a new style for yourself. The easiest way to find a new style in watercolor is try a different paper. In fact, I recently discovered this paper. It's kind of like Yupo. It's a synthetic paper, but Yupo, sometimes the paint will bead too much on it. And from what I've experienced with this paper, it didn't bead. It allowed me to paint on it. In fact, let me show you my painting, because I have it here, because I'm doing a big project on my Patreon of a sea turtle. and I'm putting a lot of pressure on it to be perfect. So I don't usually do studies because I guess I'm too lazy. But this paper made it a dream to do studies, because if you don't like something, you can let it dry and wipe it off. This is like painting on dry erase board. It's so cool. So you can make a big, huge mess, and in fact, make a puddle and float all kinds of colors and get really cool blends, and then just wipe off the parts that you don't like, which I did that in this painting. So this is also a start to finish tutorial. It is just the study, but it's a painting in and of itself, because I kept working on it until I liked it. So this will inform my serious painting of the sea turtle when I go to finish that. And especially if you're having problems working out your background, you can do a little study on this. And if you paint the background and you hate it, just wipe it away and try a different approach, which I did that with this painting. So I really love this paper. So if you would ever like a tutorial on this, I could do that. I've also been experimenting with mineral paper. That's a new one too. I'll show you my initial outcome. It's just abstracted blends with Rockwell. It's a Canadian company that does these super granulating, super beautiful colors. And I was playing with those on this paper. So this is a very similar look to what you get with the Yupo, this synthetic paper, where the colors are a lot richer because the paint sits on top of the paper. I got a lot of really great granulation on it. So I might be trying this paper in the near future. So if you would be interested in that, I might do a tutorial on that. I'm just kind of overwhelmed because I have so many exciting things that I don't even know where to start. So, and by the way, this is the pastelmat by Clairefontaine. That's what it looks like. I get mine off Amazon. I will leave links in the description below for free tutorials I have. I have a sample beginner bunny tutorial. If you are interested in painting soft, dreamy realism with a heavy lead towards animals, you might enjoy my Patreon, where I have close to 200 tutorials. And when you join, you get instant access to those tutorials, depending on what tier you join. So be sure to check out my Facebook. I have a free Facebook group where you can join for free and post your paintings, and we can get to know each other better and get to know my community. And we all are very supportive of each other. You can check out my Patreon, and you can join my Patreon for free. And I do post quite a bit there for free as well. One more thing that I'll show you that I think shows really interesting promise of what this paper is capable of is this this painting of a really light rainbow with gray around it. And look how dreamy and how glowy it looks, because the edges really are so soft, and it was so easy to get those soft edges and get everything blended really beautifully. That's what's exciting to me about this paper, and I want to try maybe some abstracts along this vein, or maybe just some fun rainbow paintings, because they are so relaxing to do and pretty low stress when you have the right paper. And so I really like how this paper handled this, and I was just playing around. And then I splatted it with clean, clear water, and it got those really cool little, almost, it looks like snowy effects. This would be fun to do like a snowy theme too, with all the cauliflowers that it does. Be interesting. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment and let me know if you've ever tried pastelmat. And until next time, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.